On a cracked black plateau beneath a bruised violet sky, a lone swordsman drives a plain longsword into the chest of a towering shadow, and the demon lord's final roar collapses into a silence so total that the ash begins to fall like slow gray snow over the dying battlefield. Kale Verne stands at the lip of the smoking crater, ash-blonde hair matted with blood and grit, the kingdom's frayed white cloak hanging in ribbons from his shoulders. And for one trembling breath, he simply breathes, alive, victorious, the savior of a continent that does not yet know it is saved. His chest heaves under the dented silver blue plate, his sword arm shaking from a year of war that ends in this single instant, and the warm gray blue of his eyes fixes on the place where the shadow stood, half expecting it to rise again from the cooling glass of the crater. It does not rise. The obsidian spires of the rift hum faintly as the last of the dark power bleeds out into the violet air, and Kale lowers the long sword at last, the tip ringing softly against the fused ground, the only sound in a world that has stopped screaming. Through the drifting ash, he sees the bodies of comrades he could not save, their faces upturned to the sky, and grief and triumph war across his scarred features as he names each of them silently, refusing to let the victory erase the cost that bought it. A wind crosses the plateau and stirs the ash into pale spirals around his boots, and Kale kneels there at the crater's rim, pressing one gauntlet hand flat to the warm glass, as if to feel for a pulse beneath the dead battlefield, finding only the slow ticking of stone cooling toward winter. In that kneeling silence, for the space of a heartbeat, he feels something else, a small smoldering ember lodged near his own heart, the dying enemy's power offering itself in a whisper, promising strength in exchange for everything human, and Kale, even exhausted, refuses it without hesitation and rises clean. He stands and looks out across the ruined rift from the crater's rim, the obsidian spires casting long crooked shadows in the violet light, and he tells himself the war is over. The dark is dead, and the worst thing he will ever do is already behind him. And the ember at his heart says nothing, content to wait. A wounded comrade calls weakly from the ash below, and Kale half slides down the cooling glass to reach him, pressing a torn strip of his own cloak to the man's side. And in that small act of mercy on the dead plateau, he is, for the last time in his life, simply a soldier and not yet a legend or a monster. Far below the plateau, at the ragged edge of the broken army, a court mage named Lyse Erwin lowers her pale blue focus crystal, amber eyes wet with relief, and watches the small distant figure of Kale silhouetted against the violet horizon as if she is memorizing a legend being born. Around Lyse, the surviving soldiers begin a ragged, disbelieving cheer that rolls down the slope like a slow tide, helmets thrown skyward, and she alone stays quiet, her braided auburn hair stirring in the ash wind, sensing without knowing why that something in the moment is too large to be only joy. She lifts the crystal once more and lets its pale light reach toward the distant figure, a habit of a mage who likes to confirm what her heart already believes. And through the magic, she catches the precise weariness in Kale's shoulders and feels a pang she cannot yet name. The news outruns the survivors. By the time Kale descends the long ash slope on foot, refusing a horse so he can walk among the wounded, a single rider has already galloped for the capital, carrying the word that the demon lord is dead and the ashen hero walks home alive. Lyse falls into step a little behind him on the descent, near enough to help if he stumbles, far enough to leave him the dignity of his exhaustion. And she watches the savior bind a stranger's wound with his own torn cloak and thinks that whatever the histories will say, she has seen the true measure of the man. The word spreads down every mountain road like spilled light, through frontier garrisons, through farming valleys, through the river towns that had drilled their children to flee. And everywhere the same disbelieving relief looms, and everywhere the same name is spoken. The ashen hero, the one who ended the long dark. Kale himself hears almost none of it. He walks the war road for days at the pace of the wounded, sharing his rations, carrying a wounded boy on his own back for a full afternoon. And the men who march behind him do not yet call him villain, do not yet imagine they ever could. The boy on his back asks, in the small voice of the very young, whether the bad dark is truly gone now, and Kale answers that it is, that no one need fear the night any longer, and he means it with his whole tired heart, not knowing how cruelly the realm will make a liar of him before the year is out. At night, he sits apart from the campfires, watching the smoke rise and remembering the comrades the ash buried, and the ember near his heart stays cold and quiet, refused and forgotten, while the gray-blue eyes that will one day burn red stare into a future he believes is finally bright. Days later, the white and gold tears of Aurelian rise before before him out of the morning mist, bells ringing across the mountainside, banners with the sun sigil snapping in the high wind, and Kale halts on the high road, overwhelmed, his torn cloak fluttering as the city he saved opens its gates. From the high road, the capital looks like a thing out of a child's story. Tier upon tier of pale stone climbing the mountain to the mirrored palace at the crown. And Kale stands there a long moment, hardly believing that the war is truly behind him and this gleaming peace ahead. The streets swallow him in a roar of joy. Petals rain from carved balconies. Children dart between the legs of the crowd to press flowers into his bloodied gauntlets. And Kale, who has not slept without nightmares in a year, almost smiles, the warmth of the crowd loosening something locked tight behind his eyes. An old woman reaches from the press of bodies to touch the hem of his ribboned cloak as though it can heal her. And a baker thrusts warm bread into his hands. And the ashen hero, who killed a god of shadow 3 days ago, finds his throat tight at the simple kindness of fed people. He moves up through the tears in a slow river of celebration, the noise breaking over him in waves. And he lets it carry him, because for the first time in a year there is nothing to fight, nothing to fear, only the bright, impossible fact of a city that loves him. From a high balcony, the king watches the hero's slow ascent through the cheering tears, and his face wears the same warm pride as the crowd's. But his pale eyes follow Kale the way a man watches a debt come due, already weighing how much more dangerous a beloved hero is than a defeated enemy. Beside the king, the gray chamberlain murmurs something behind a gloved hand, and the king nods once, almost imperceptibly, and turns from the balcony with his warm smile fixed in place. And far below in the bright streets, Kale lifts a laughing child onto his shoulders, knowing nothing of the small fatal nod. At the palace steps, the young king Aldred descends in cloth of gold to clasp Kale's forearm before the cheering thousands. And the cold overhead light of the great square catches the king's smile, wide and bright, and somehow never quite reaching the calculating stillness of his pale eyes. Kale does not notice the stillness. He is a soldier, not a courtier, and he reads the embrace as gratitude and the speech that follows as a nation's thanks. And when the king names him Sword of the Realm before the crowd, the roar that answers shakes petals from the highest balconies. Behind the king, ranks of nobles in jeweled finery applaud with soft gloved hands, and among them a chamberlain in plain gray stands very still, his eyes moving over Kale the way a clerk's eyes move over a sum that must be settled. And then he slips quietly back through a side door. Kale is led up the palace steps he will one day climb in cinder and ash, but tonight they are strewn with flowers, and he climbs them as a hero, the dinted plate gleaming, the torn white cloak a banner of his sacrifice, and the great mirrored doors open before him onto a feast. That night in the mirrored throne hall, beneath chandeliers like frozen fire, the court toasts the ashen hero across a vast checkerboard floor, and Lys watches from a shadowed gallery as nobles who never bled crowd, close to touch the cloak of the man who bled for them all. The hall is a marvel of cold beauty, its walls hung with tall mirrors that throw the candlelight back 1,000-fold, so that every guest stands among glittering reflections of themselves. And Kale, and used to such rooms, keeps catching his own scarred face in the glass and not quite recognizing the legend it has become. Lys does not descend to him. Something holds her in the gallery's shadow, a court mage's instinct for the wrongness beneath polished things, and she watches the king move through the crowd toward Kale with a host's warm smile and astride a shade too purposeful for mere welcome. From her high vantage, she notices the small things a courtier learns to read, the gray chamberlain's careful path through the crowd, the way 2 guards have drifted to cover the only door, the way the nobles nearest Kale hold their own cups untouched, and a cold thread of dread begins to wind through her chest. She tells herself she is imagining it, that the hero of the realm is the safest man in the kingdom tonight, and she leans on the gallery rail and watches anyway, unable to look away, the dread tightening with every step the smiling king takes toward the man who saved them all. A goblet is pressed into Kale's hand, the wine dark as old blood, and the king lifts his own cup in a long flowing speech about debts that can never be repaid, while the gray-clad chamberlain melts back into the crowd, his task already done, his face arranged into the same bland attention as every other. Kale listens to the speech with the patience of a tired man. The warmth of the wine and the warmth of the room and the warmth of being safe all blurring pleasantly together, and he does not see Lys in the gallery lean forward, her amber eyes fixed on the goblet in his hand. He drinks, because refusing the king's toast before the whole court is unthinkable, and the wine is sweet, and then strangely bitter, and across the hall Lys sees his hand tighten on the goblet's stem, sees the first flicker of of confusion cross his face and rises half out of her seat. The hall tilts. The chandeliers smear into long streaks of gold. The mirrors multiply the smear into a vortex of light. And Kale's knees strike the cold checkerboard floor as the goblet rolls away, ringing across the tiles. The sound enormous in a hall that has gone suddenly, watchfully quiet. He looks up through swimming vision at the ring of faces above him. Courtiers, nobles, the king. And he sees no shock in any of them, only a patient, collective watching. And the falling elevator lurch of understanding hits him all at once. The wine was meant for him alone, and they all knew. He reaches for the long sword that is not at his belt, surrendered at the door as custom demands, his fingers closing on empty air. And the helplessness of it is worse than any wound. The ashen hero unarmed in the heart of the city he saved, betrayed by the very hands he came to thank. The last thing Kale sees before the dark takes him is the king's bright smile finally reaching his pale eyes, warm with something like relief, and Lys's horrified face high in the gallery vanishing behind a wall of palace. Guards in silver blue plate who move with the smoothness of an order long rehearsed. Then the gold light folds inward to a single point and goes out, and the ashen hero collapses full length on the checkerboard floor among the cheering he can no longer hear. And the court steps back from his fallen body, the way one steps back from a thing already counted and filed away. High in the gallery, Lys fights toward the stairs and finds them blocked by guards who do not quite touch her but will not let her pass. And through the bars of their crossed halberds, she watches servants lift Kale's limp form and carry him away through a door that is not the door he entered by. She does not sleep that night. She paces her chambers among her own books and instruments, telling herself there is an explanation, a healer's quarantine, a misunderstanding, and not believing any of it. And outside her window, the festival of the saved city burns bright and careless over the buried truth. Kale wakes to dripping black water and the green guttering of torchlight, his cheek pressed to slick stone, iron biting his wrists, and the slow horror of it crawls over him. He is chained to a pillar in a flooded cell, deep beneath the city he saved only days before. For a long moment he does not move, certain it is a nightmare of the kind that has plagued him all year, waiting to wake on a clean cot in the palace. And the not waking is its own slow torture as the cold of the water seeps through his ruined plate into his bones. The drowned jail stretches around him in claustrophobic dark, chained pillars vanishing into oily water. A single barred grate far overhead, leaking a sliver of daylight that does not reach the floor. And Kale's breath fogs as the cold and the betrayal settle into his bones together. He pulls experimentally at the chains and they hold. His wrists are raw already where the iron has shifted in his unconscious sleep. And the long sword is gone, the plate stripped to its underlayer. And he is reduced from sword of the realm to a shape in the dark indistinguishable from any other prisoner. He calls out once into the dripping dark, his voice cracking on the name of the king, demanding an answer, an explanation, a charge. And the only reply is the echo off the wet stone and the distant cough of another forgotten prisoner. And the silence that follows is the first true taste of what has been done to him. The poison still smolders in his blood, turning his thoughts thick and slow. And through the fog, he keeps reaching for the memory of the feast, the sweet wine, the bitter aftertaste, the king's smile finally reaching his eyes. And each time the memory surfaces, the betrayal lands again as freshly as a blade. A jailer's distant voice, indifferent and bored, drifts down the flooded corridor as he reads a charge aloud to no one in particular, his words echoing off wet stone. That the hero Kale Verne conspired with a demon lord, that his victory was a sham, that the crown sentences him to be forgotten in the deep. The absurdity of the charge is its own cruelty. Everyone in the realm knows what Kale did on the rift, and the lie is not meant to convince, but to bury. A thin official skin stretched over the simple fact that the crown has decided its hero is more dangerous alive than dead. Rage and disbelief shudder through Kale's chained frame. He wrenches against the iron until his wrists run red, the chains screaming on the pillar, water churning black around his knees. But his strength is gone, drained by the poison still smoldering in his veins, and his roar dissolves into ragged breathing. He sags against the pillar at last, chest heaving, and forces the rage down into something colder and more useful. And in the green dark he begins, methodically, to think, not of escape yet, but of why, turning the betrayal over and over to find the seam where the lie meets the truth. For long days he hangs in the green half-light, counting the slow drips from the grate, listening to other prisoners cough and weep and fall silent in nearby cells. And the warmth the crowd had loosened in him cools, hardens, blackens, every cheering face curdling into the single cold question question of who ordered the cup. In the cell across the black water, a dying old man tells the dark in a cracked whisper that he was a clerk who once copied a sealed pact he should never have read, and that the crown buries everyone who touches its true history. And Kale listens to the confession with a new and terrible attention. The old clerk dies before dawn, his whisper trailing off into the drip of the grate, and Kale sits chained in the green dark, turning the half-heard words over and over, the seed of a suspicion planting itself beside his rage, that the war he won was never the war he was told he was fighting. He scratches a tally of the days into the soft stone of the pillar with a chip of his own broken fingernail, not from hope, but from discipline. The habit of a soldier who refuses to let even a dungeon erase the simple fact of his own continued existence. One scratch line at a time, he learns the jail by sound, the schedule of the jailer's rounds, the particular drip that marks the hour, the way the distant grate's light shifts from white to gold to gone. And he hoards these small facts the way a starving man hoards crumbs, because they are all the power he has left. Lice comes once, descending the slick stairs with a smuggled lantern, her court robes hemmed with black water, and she presses her hand flat against the cold bars, unable to meet his eyes, confessing in a low rush that she could not stop it, that the king's reasons are sealed, that she is sorry. She tells him, words tumbling over each other, that the official story is everywhere already, that the people believe it because believing it is easier than believing their king poisoned their savior, and that she has tried every door of the court and found them all closed against her by an order from the very top. Kale does not curse her. Worse, he says nothing at all, simply watching her with the steady gray-blue eyes she remembers from the battlefield. And the weight of that silence presses Lice back a step, then another, until the lantern light no longer reaches his face, and he is only a shape in the dark. When she finally flees back up the slick stairs, the silence he leaves in her chest is heavier than any scream. And she knows even then, climbing toward the careless light of the palace, that it will not leave her, that she has crossed some line and can never recross it. Weeks pass. The poison should have killed him, and when it does not, the crown simply stops sending food, an order given without ceremony. The cheapest way to finish a thing the wine left undone. And in the starving dark, Kale's mind drifts back again and again to the crater on the Violet Plateau. He remembers the whisper at the very end of the last war, the dying enemy's power offering itself, the black ember promising survival in exchange for everything human, and how he, the Ashen Hero, had refused it and won clean, and how now, chained and discarded, he understands the offer was never truly gone. The ember has lodged near his heart all this time, dormant, refused, a coal banked under ash. And in the hunger and the cold and the slow erasure of everything he was, Kale feels it stir each time his rage rises, patient as the jail itself, waiting for the night he stops refusing. In the deepest hour, when the great's daylight has died and the jail is a single held breath, Kale closes his eyes and reaches inward toward the smoldering remnant the dying war left lodged near his heart. And he stops refusing it, and he asks it, at last, to let him live. The corruption answers like a coal breathed back to flame. Fine black vein lines crack outward across his chest over the heart, glowing faint orange in the green dark, and a heat that is not fever and not entirely human rolls down his arms toward the iron that holds him. The chains that bound the Ashen Hero begin, link by groaning link, to soften and smoke against that heat, the metal weeping orange at the seams. And Kale grits his teeth against the braided agony and ecstasy of the power moving through him, every nerve singing with a strength he was never meant to wield. The iron parts. Kale sinks to his knees in the black water as the chains fall away hissing into the flood. And when he lifts his face, the right eye no longer matches the left. It burns a dim ember red that glows faintly in the dark, and the man the kingdom buried opens his changed eyes alive. He kneels there a long moment, breathing, watching his reflection waver in the black water, the silver creeping into his hair at the roots, the cinder cracks faintly aglow on his chest, the mismatched eyes. And he understands without grief or joy that the Ashen Hero died in this cell, and something else has climbed out. He does not flee at once. He wades through the flooded jail from cell to cell, breaking soft glowing iron with a touch, freeing the forgotten, the political prisoners, the inconvenient witnesses, the men whose only crime was knowing too much, and they shrink from the ember light in his eye even as they follow him toward the stairs. One old prisoner, half mad from the dark, asks the freed shape whether he is a demon come for them, and Kale answers, in a flat voice that does not echo, that he is what the kingdom made when it tried to bury a hero, and the old man falls silent and follows anyway. At the prison's choke point, a squad of guards levels halberds in the green torchlight, ordered to ensure the hero stays forgotten, and Kale lifts one open hand toward them. The cinder cracks on his chest flaring bright, and the corruption answers as a wash of black heat that buckles their steel where they hold it. The guards drop their ruined weapons and flee up the stairs in a clatter of panic, and not one of them is killed, which terrifies them more than death would have, because a hero who slaughters is a thing the mind can file away, and a hero who spares them and lets them run is a verdict still pending. Kale climbs the slick stair toward the sliver of daylight he has watched for weeks, ash already beginning to drift from the cracks in his skin, and as he steps out into a forgotten cellar beneath Aurelian, he makes the city above him a silent promise that needs no words to be a sentence. He does not march on the palace. That would be the act of a man who still trusts his own rage, and Kale trusts nothing now. So he crouches in the forgotten cellar and listens to the city celebrate above him, while he gathers the strangeness of what he has become. He slips from the capital through a drainage canal at dawn, hooded, the freed prisoners scattering into the waking streets behind him, while above the gates the bells of Aurelian ring for some festival that has already forgotten the hero's name, and Kale walks out beneath them unseen and unmourned. In the gray light of the canal mouth, he pauses to study his own reflection in a still pool of runoff, and the face that looks back is a stranger's, silver at the hairline, one eye banked like a coal, dark cracks at his collar, and he feels neither grief nor pride, only a cold accounting of the tools he has been given. Two city watchmen pass within a few paces of the hooded figure at the canal mouth, complaining idly about festival duty and the price of bread, and they do not recognize the savior they once cheered, and Kale lets them pass unharmed, filing away how easily a legend becomes a man no one sees. The canal lets him out below the city walls into a reed-choked marsh, and he stands there in the gray light looking back up at the white and gold tears climbing the mountain, the mirrored palace gleaming at the crown, and he feels the ember in his eye pulse once, slow, like a thing taking the measure of a target. He turns east, away from the kindness that betrayed him, and walks. The festival noise fades behind him with each mile, replaced by birdsong and wind, and the hood hides the silver hair and the burning eye, so that to the few travelers he passes he is only another road-worn man drifting toward the broken edges of the realm. That first night beyond the city, he camps in the ruin of a wayside shrine and tests the corruption deliberately, drawing the black heat into his open palm and letting it gutter out again, learning its weight and its limits the way he once learned a new blade, refusing to let the power use him before he has learned to use it. The ember whispers to him as he practices, offering more than he asks for, urging him toward the city and the throne and the vengeance it can taste in his blood. And Kale answers it without words, banking it back down each time. A daily war fought in silence on the empty roads east. Beyond the white city, the land turns gray and broken. The ember waste, a frontier of scorched villages and tilted watchtowers ravaged in the war Kale ended, never rebuilt because the crown found the survivors too poor and too distant to matter. And here, among the abandoned, the discarded hero begins again. He walks for days through the desolation, past fields gone to ashweed, past the black bones of barns, past wells fouled by the war and never cleaned. And with every ruin, the cold purpose in him sets harder, because this is the cost the white city's celebration was built on and chose to forget. On a wind-scoured ridge at dusk, Kale stands in profile against a bleeding orange sky, the tattered remnants of his white cloak snapping behind him. And below, in a half-ruined village, he watches crown tax soldiers beat an old farmer for grain the man plainly does not have. The ember in his eye brightens at the sight, the cinder cracks at his collar waking to a faint orange glow beneath the hood, and Kale descends the ridge in the failing light with the unhurried stride of a man who has already decided how the next few minutes will end. He walks into the village square as the soldiers turn, and he does not draw a blade. He simply lets the black vein light show at his throat, and the corruption rolls off him like heat off a forge, and the tax soldiers' courage drains away as they recognize, far too late, what they have cornered. One of them looses a crossbow bolt out of pure terror, and the bolt blackens and crumbles to ash in the air a hand's breadth from Kale's chest, and that is enough. The soldiers break and run for their horses, leaving the old farmer crumpled and bewildered in the dust of his own ruined square. When the dust settles, the villagers do not cheer the way the capital cheered. They creep from doorways and kneel in the ash and the failing light, terrified and grateful in equal measure. And Kale looks at their upturned faces and feels nothing of the warmth the petals once gave him, only a cold, clear sense of purpose taking root. He helps the old farmer up himself, the gesture strange against the ember glow, and asks not for thanks but for the road the soldiers came from and where their garrison garrison sits, and how often they bleed the village. Gathering the shape of the crowns neglect the way he once gathered the schedule of the jail. That night the village brings him what little they have, a thin stew, a place by the chapel fire. And Kale notices the children watching him from the shadows with the wide eyes of the war orphan. And something in his cold purpose shifts a degree, sharpening from vengeance towards something that almost resembles protection. Before dawn, he walks alone to the crown garrison the farmer described and stands in its open gate. And the soldiers who poured out the day before to beat an old man find they have no stomach to face the ember-eyed shape in their doorway. And the garrison empties west by noon without a single blow struck. By firelight that night, in the shell of a burned chapel, the old farmer asks the hooded stranger who he is, and Kale answers only that he is someone the kingdom decided should be dead, and the way he says it, flat, certain, unafraid, makes the chapel fire seem to lean away from him. The farmer does not press. He has seen enough of the world to know which questions to leave unasked, and he shares what little food the soldiers left. And Kale eats in silence across the small fire, the ember in his eye banked low, looking almost like an ordinary tired man under the cracked stone arches. Word of a hooded man with an ember eye who breaks crowned soldiers spreads through the ember waste faster than any decree, passing from village to village along the smugglers' tracks and the refugee roads, and the discarded begin to drift toward the rumor. Deserters, war widows, outlawed mages, the children of villages the crown abandoned. They come looking for something the white city never gave them, and they find a man who does not promise them glory or even safety, only that the soldiers who beat them will think twice, and that the wells will be clean, and that no one who comes to his fire will be turned away for being poor. Kale does not recruit them with speeches. He simply does not turn them away, and he sets them to rebuilding what the crown abandoned. The wells, the watchtowers, the fields, and the ember waste, for the first time in years, begins to look like a place where people intend to stay alive. He teaches them to fight, the deserters first, then anyone with a will, drilling them in the burned chapel and the empty fields with the soldiers' patience. And slowly the rumor of the ember-eyed man acquires the harder edge of an organized thing, a power growing in the place the crown forgot. He sets strict laws for the gathering host from the very first. No village is to be bled the way the crown bled them. No prisoner is to be killed. No spark is to be forced on the unwilling. And he enforces these laws himself. And the followers learn that the Cinder King's mercy is not weakness, but a wall they are not permitted to cross. Word of those laws travels as far as the rumor of his power. And it is the laws, more than the fear, that turn the frontier toward him. A man with terrible strength is common enough in the wastes, but a man with terrible strength who will not let his own people loot the poor is a thing the ember waste has never seen. And he shares the corruption's lesser sparks with those strong enough to bear it. A careful giving, never force, the black vein light blooming faint at the throats of a dozen, then 100 of his followers, until the ember waste has the beginnings of an army the capital does not yet believe is real. A young war widow named among the first of them takes the spark and weeps when it settles, not from pain, but from the return of a strength the war had drained out of her. And she stands taller afterward in the chapel firelight, and Kale watches her with the closest thing to gentleness his changed face still allows. A former crown sergeant who deserted rather than burn a village arrives one cold morning and lays his old blade at Kale's feet without a word. And Kale does not take the blade, but lifts the man to his feet. And the deserter becomes the drill master of the ragged host, teaching farmers to stand in a line that does not break. Not all who come are worthy of the spark, and Kale learns to read them. He turns away a smiling man whose eyes hold the same patient calculation he remembers from the king's, and the man leaves cursing. And Kale watches him go down the ash road and marks him as a thing to be watched from a distance. He is careful in the giving. He has felt the ember's hunger in his own chest, and he will not loose that hunger unchecked on people who trust him. So he gives only what each can master, and he watches them for the first sign of the greed the power breeds. And more than once he takes the spark back, by night, in the shell of the burned chapel that has become his hall. Kale sits alone after the others sleep and feels the ember whisper to him of more, of taking the whole frontier, of marching on the white city, of becoming a king of cinder. And he listens, and he refuses, and he files the whisper away as a thing to be watched. Far away in the mirror vault beneath the palace, Lyse Erwin stands among scrying mirrors that fracture her auburn-braided reflection into 100 guilty copies, watching the impossible images of a dead hero alive in the wastes. And the king's order arrives by sealed scroll. Find him and finish what the wine began. She has spent the weeks since the jail unable to eat or sleep, the silence Kale left in her chest growing heavier each day, and now she stands before the proof that he lived. lives, that the poison and the chains and the starving dark did not erase him. And she does not know whether the cold she feels is fear or hope. The mirrors show her the burned villages rebuilt, the cleaned wells, the watchtowers manned, the people fed. And they show her too the ember in his eye and the cinder cracks at his throat, and the court's official story, that the demon lord's pawn has crawled out of the deep to spread his corruption, refuses to fit the images in the glass. She leans close to one mirror that shows Kale lifting a fallen child from the mud of a rebuilt road, and she searches the image for the monster the court insists he has become, and she finds instead the same weary care she watched him show the wounded on the long march home from the rift, and the contradiction unsettles her deeply. Alone in the vault, she speaks the official story aloud to the fracturing mirrors, testing it against the images, and the words come apart in her mouth like wet paper, and she understands that she is being asked to hunt a man for the crime of surviving what the crown did to him. In the mirrored throne hall above her, the king paces the checkerboard floor where Kale fell, no longer smiling, and the cold overhead light shows the fear beneath his crown as he demands of his council how a man poisoned, chained, and starved is now burning crown banners along the frontier and being called something new. The council offers no answer that satisfies him. They speak of corruption and demons and the need for a swift total response. And the king listens with the stillness of a man who knows more than his counsel and fears more than he will say, his gaze drifting again and again to the spot where his hero knelt and fell. For the Ember Waste has given Kale a name he did not choose and does not refuse, the Throne of Cinders. And on a windswept watchtower he stands as his ragged followers haul down a crown banner and set it alight against the dusk. The sun sigil curls and blackens in the firelight, the gold thread catching last. And Kale watches without expression as the symbol of the realm he saved burns to ash on the wind, the ember in his eye reflecting the flames, the cinder cracks at his throat glowing in answer to the fire. The burning banner is the first open declaration, and it carries on the wind to every garrison in the region. Crown captains who once toasted the ashen hero now read frantic orders to hunt a traitor, and the realm begins to split quietly down a seam no one in the White City understands yet. In a riverside garrison, a young crown lieutenant reads the order to march on the Ember Waste, and remembers the day his own village was saved from the dark by the ashen hero's sword, and he sets the order down and stares at the wall. And that night he and a dozen of his men ride east instead of west toward the cinder. In a market town, the criers shout the crown's version of events, the corrupted traitor, the demon-touched usurper, and an old woman who once threw petals from a balcony listens with her arms folded, unconvinced, because she remembers the face beneath the official story, and the official story does not match her memory of his eyes. In the frontier towns, the choice arrives like weather. The crown's tax and neglect on one side, the Cinder King's order and fed children on the other, and family by family, garrison by garrison, the people of the Ember Waste begin to choose, and the choosing is rarely loud, but it is everywhere. Lyce rides out from Aurelian in a pragmatic blue-gray coat, her hair bound back, her court life folded behind her, leading a column of soldiers and inquisitors into the Ember Waste to bring back the head of the man she once watched become a legend. And her amber eyes are already haunted before the first mile. She tells herself she rides to end the corruption, to spare the realm a second dark war, to do her duty, and she does not let herself examine too closely the smaller, truer reason that she cannot bear to read about him from a distance, that she must see with her own eyes what the kingdom made him. She finds the frontier transformed, villages the crown abandoned now fed and fortified, watchtowers manned by people with faint black vein light at their throats, fields green again where she expected only ash. And everywhere she asks about the Throne of Cinders, she meets the same answer she did not expect. The people are not afraid of him. They are afraid of what brought him back, of the betrayal at the feast they have heard whispered along the smugglers' roads. And beneath that fear lies a quiet, stubborn loyalty to the man who fed them when the crown sent only soldiers. And Lyce inquisitors find no one willing to inform. In a fortified village at dusk, Lyce confronts a line of these followers across the square, her focus crystal blazing pale blue, demanding the Cinder King's whereabouts. And an old farmer steps forward unarmed to tell her plainly that the crown soldiers came to beat them and the dead hero came to feed them. She has no answer that does not taste of ash. The official story dies in her mouth before she can speak it, and she stands there in the failing light with her crystal blazing and 100 unafraid villagers watching her. And for the first time she feels herself to be the thing in the wrong. She makes camp that night in the square of the very village she failed to cow, her soldiers uneasy among people who will not fear them, and she she sits apart by her own small fire, turning the old farmer's words over, the official story curling and blackening in her mind like the banner on the watchtower. That night, Kale comes to her himself, unguarded, walking alone into the firelight of her camp as if her 100 soldiers are not there, ash drifting near his half-lit face, and the men who level crossbows at him find their strings smoldering before they can loose. He sits across the fire from Lice as if no betrayal lies between them, the gray eye and the burning eye both fixed on her, and her soldiers wait white-knuckled at the camp's edge, held back by his ease as much as by her raised hand, none of them willing to be the one who tests what he has become. He does not threaten her. He asks her, in the flat, certain voice the fire leans away from, whether she ever wondered why the king needed the hero dead the very night the war was won. And the question lodges in Lice like a splinter she cannot reach, because she has wondered and has been afraid to. He tells her, as one laying down facts like cards rather than a man pleading, that the corruption he carries remembers things the demon lord knew, fragments of memory that came with the power, and that those memories do not match the story the crown tells about how the war began. He says the dark did not rise on its own from the deep as the histories claim, that something woke it, fed it, aimed it, and that the war which made him a hero was made on purpose by hands that wore no shadow. And then he rises and walks back into the dark without waiting for her to believe him. Lice does not sleep. She sits by the dying fire, turning his words against everything she was taught, and against the small cold facts she has filed away for years. The king's strange certainty at the war's start, the sealed records, the speed of the betrayal, and the splinter works deeper into her with every hour. At dawn, she does a forbidden thing. She uses her focus crystal to reach back across the leagues to the mirror vault, to look again at the sealed records of how the demon lord first rose, and what she half sees through the long magic. Before the connection snaps, turns her amber eyes cold and her certainty to glass. Before she can confirm it, the crown's inquisitors in her own column move against her, having read the doubt plain on her face the night before. And Lice finds herself suddenly the hunted one, her soldiers divided, blades drawn in her own camp under a gray frontier dawn, her loyalty to Aurelian shattering in a single violent breath. The inquisitors name her corrupted, name her seduced by the Cinder King, name her a traitor in the same breath the crown named Kale one. And the symmetry of it strikes her even as she raises her crystal to defend herself. The realization that the kingdom destroys whatever doubts it, hero or mage alike. Kale's followers hit the camp from the ridgeline at that exact moment, not to slaughter, but to scatter. Smoke pots and shouting and disarming sweeps of black heat that ruin weapons without ending lives. And in the chaos of smoke and panicked horses, Lice stands alone in the center of it all. Her focus crystal raised, the camp dissolving into confusion around her. She is forced to choose in an instant which side of the burning seam she will fall on. The crown that would silence her doubt, or the Cinder King whose truth she does not yet trust. And the moment stretches taut as a drawn string. She does not join Kale that day. She flees both armies into the broken hills, a woman belonging to neither, the crown's traitor and the Cinder King's stranger. And the last image of the camp is Kale standing in the drifting smoke, watching her ride away and choosing deliberately not to stop her. For days she hides in the broken hills, sleeping in caves and dry watercourses, her court robes traded for a peasant's drab, the inquisitors' hunting parties combing the slopes below her with hounds and cold lanterns. And she learns in that hunted time exactly how it felt to be Kale in the jail, discarded by the realm she served. One night, an inquisitor's patrol corners her in a dry ravine, and she does a thing she has never had to do. She fights to kill, her focus crystal flaring pale blue in the dark, scattering them with light and leaving herself shaking afterward. No longer a court mage, but a fugitive who has crossed a line of her own. For Kale needs her to find the truth on her own. A truth handed down is a truth distrusted, and the throne of cinders has learned patience in the deep. So he lets her go into the hills with her crystal and her doubt, and he turns his ember gaze back toward the white city on the mountain. He begins, at last, to move his gathered storm toward Aurelian, the rebuilt watchtowers emptying as his people form into something that marches. And the rumor that has crept along the smugglers' roads for months becomes a visible thing on the horizon, a slow gray tide rising out of the forgotten frontier. At the head of the march, Kale walks rather than rides. As he walked the war road home from the rift, and the host behind him moves in disciplined silence under his strict laws. No looting, no burning, no killing of the surrendered, so that the towns they pass through find themselves liberated rather than conquered. The war widow captains the vanguard, and the deserter sergeant drills the rear. And between them, the ragged frontier army holds a shape that astonishes unleashes the crown's scouts, who report back to Aurelian not a horde of demons, but an ordered column of the very people the kingdom abandoned, marching behind a single ember-eyed man. The realm wakes to find the Ember Waste no longer a forgotten margin, but a marching front. Garrison after garrison falls not to massacre, but to surrender, soldiers laying down arms before a man who refuses to kill them. And the crown's terror deepens, because an enemy who spares you is harder to hate and to obedience. The crown's own captains begin to waver. They read the orders to slaughter the Cinder King's followers, and they look at the disarmed survivors of the last garrison walking home unharmed. And more than a few of them quietly lose the will to die for a king who poisoned the hero they once cheered. In the capital, the king tries to stem the bleeding loyalty with proclamations and processions, parading old victory banners through the streets. But the people who once threw petals now watch the parades in silence. And the official story of the corrupted traitor grows thinner with every garrison that surrenders without a fight. The king doubles the guard on the mirror vault and the drowned jail and the sealed crypts beneath the palace, sensing without quite naming it that his throne rests on buried things. And the more he guards them, the more his own court begins to wonder what exactly the crown is so afraid of being seen. In the Broken Hills, Lys follows the rumor of the marching tide from a distance, and she makes her own slow way back toward the capital by forgotten paths, not to warn the crown, but to confirm the thing her crystal half showed her, because she cannot fight on either side until she knows which side is the lie. She slips into the palace through the forgotten way she alone remembers, the old mage passages behind the mirrored walls. And at midnight, she stands again in the mirror vault among the fracturing reflections, and this time she breaks the seal the king placed on the oldest scrying records, her hands steady though her heart is not. The hall of reflections fills with images the crown has hidden for a generation, the silver light of the mirrors throwing them across the vaulted dark, and Lys turns slowly among them, her 100 reflected faces turning with her, reading the buried history the kingdom built its golden peace upon. The mirrors show her the war's true beginning, not a demon lord rising from the deep on its own, but a young king's counselors waking the sleeping corruption on purpose, feeding it a border province to justify a war that would unite the fractured realm beneath one crown. They show the calculation behind it all, that a long dark war would frighten the squabbling great houses into submission, that a single shining hero would be needed to win it and bind the people's love to the throne, and that the hero, once he had served, would be far too dangerous to leave alive. She sees, in a mirror clearer than the rest, the young king's own hand pressed to the sealed pact that woke the dark, and she understands that the demon Lord Kale killed on the Violet Plateau was the crown's own weapon, loosed and then blamed, and that Kale's whole legend was a tool the king intended to break. The corruption Kale carries had whispered true. The thing the kingdom feared he had become was made first by the kingdom itself, in a cellar like the one that birthed the war, and the line between hero, villain, and demon lord blurs into a single damning shape in the silver glass. Lys sinks to the cold floor of the vault among her 100 horrified reflections, the focus crystal dimming in her slack hand, and she understands at last the full shape of the silence Kale left in her chest in the jail, that she had served the monster all along while believing she served the realm. She does not weep. She is past weeping, and instead she begins, with the cold method of a mage who has finally found her footing, to copy the damning records, to bind their light into portable focus stones, to make the truth into a thing she can carry out of the vault and into the daylight where it cannot be sealed again. She copies the last of the damning records as the night thins toward dawn, her hands sure now though her heart aches, and she binds the focus stones into the lining of her coat, knowing that whatever happens next she can no longer pretend to serve a crown that woke its own monster to make itself a throne. Lys does not know it, but in the very hour she breaks the seal, Kale's host crests the last ridge, and the white and gold tears of Aurelian spread below them in the dawn. Bells ringing in alarm now instead of celebration, the sound thin and frightened across the mountainside. The throne of cinders looks down at the city that cheered him and then buried him, and the dawn light catches the silver in his hair and the cinder cracks at his throat, and behind him his ragged thousands wait in silence, watching their leader take the measure of the place that made him. He halts the army at the city's edge, on the very high road where he once stood overwhelmed by joy, and the contrast is a blade. The same banners, the same bell towers, the same gates that open to a hero. But now the ember in his eye is the brightest thing on the mountain. The crowds that threw petals cower behind shuttered windows. The petals are long swept away, and where children once pressed flowers into his gauntlets, the streets stand empty. And Kale feels the full circle of it close around him. The city's love and the city's fear, two faces of the same fickle thing. His captains expect him to give the order to storm the gates, but Kale holds the host on the high road through the long morning, letting the city see the disciplined column waiting in silence, letting the crown's defenders count the deserters, and the freed townsfolk among his ranks and wonder which side the realm itself is truly on. The crown throws its remaining strength against him in the lower tiers, knights in silver blue plate like the armor Kale himself once wore. And the battle that follows is terrible and strange, for Kale's corruption unmakes their weapons and their courage but takes few lives. Where his black heat passes, swords crumble and shields buckle, and men fall back, choking on ash that does not burn them. And the white streets fill with disarmed, kneeling soldiers rather than the dead. And the strangeness of a conqueror who will not kill spreads faster than any sword could through the defenders' ranks. Knights who recognize the hero beneath the cinder lower their blades unbidden. Some kneel, some flee, some simply stand aside and let the gray tide pass. Unwilling to die for a crown, they now half suspect of the very crime the Cinder King's followers whisper of, and tier by tier the resistance dissolves. A grizzled captain who fought beside Kale on the rift steps into his path at the third tier, sword drawn, torn between his oath and his memory, and Kale stops before him and does not strike. And the captain looks into the mismatched eyes a long moment before lowering his blade and stepping aside, his oath broken and his conscience whole. The young lieutenant who rode east from his riverside garrison fights now in the gray tide, shielding the kneeling defenders from the rougher of Kale's followers, enforcing the Cinder King's strange law that the disarmed are not to be harmed. And the white streets of Aurelian fill with a mercy the city was not braced to receive. Through the smoke of the lower city, Kale climbs the tiers he descended in triumph a season ago, ash drifting from his shoulders, his charcoal cloak with a burned-away sigil snapping in the heat wind. And at each level the path opens wider before him as the will to stop him drains out of the city's defenders. He passes the balconies that rained petals, the square where the baker pressed bread into his hands, the steps where the old woman touched his hem, and he reads the whole sweet lie of his homecoming in reverse, climbing now through fear what he once climbed through love, and the cold purpose in him does not waver. In the great square where the king once clasped his arm before thousands, Kale stands alone in blackened ash-gray armor, the sun sigil burned away from his charcoal cloak, and looks up the palace steps at King Aldred waiting in cloth of gold at the top. The two of them regard each other across the ruin of a shared lie, the conqueror and the king, and the watching survivors peer from windows and doorways all around the square, sensing that whatever is about to happen on those steps will decide the shape of the realm for a generation. The king does not flee. He is cleverer than that, and as Kale begins to climb the steps, the king begins to speak, a long flowing speech like the one at the feast, his trained voice carrying across the silent square, recasting himself as the realm's weary protector against the corruption climbing toward him. He names Kale the true monster, the proof that the crown was right to fear its own hero, a thing now visibly worse than the demon lord, eye of flame and skin shedding ash, marching an army of the corrupted to the palace gate. And he asks the watching city whether this is the face of a savior or of a doom. And the terrible thing is that the watching survivors half believe him, for Kale's eye does burn and ash does fall from his skin, and he has brought a host of the cinder mark to the heart of the white city. And the murmur that ripples through the square is uncertain and afraid. In that moment the throne of cinders feels the trap close around him on the steps, that to storm the palace in fire and slaughter is to become the very villain the king's speech needs him to be. And so to prove the lie true by winning, he stops on the steps, halfway up, and the whole city holds its breath. The Cinder King, who could level the palace with a thought, instead simply stands, the ember in his eye burning steady, refusing to give the crown the spectacle of slaughter that would seal its final lie. The standoff stretches taut beneath the cold overhead light, the king at the top in gold, Kale below in ash, the silent square between them thick with smoke and unasked questions, and everything in the realm balances for one long-held breath on the knife of a discarded hero's restraint. It is Lys who breaks it, bursting from the palace doors behind the king with her focus crystal blazing and the bound focus stones of the mirror vault in her hands, her voice carrying across the silent square as she does not plead but accuses, laying the crown's true crime open before the people in the plain language of evidence. The king turns, his flowing speech faltering at the sight of his own court mage arrayed against him, and Lys does not look at him. She looks at the watching city, and she lifts the focus stones high, and she speaks the buried history into the silence. The Cloak and dark, the engineered war, the hero always marked to die. The scrying images she has carried out of the vault flare to life above the focus stones in the daylight, and the fractured light shows the watching city what it showed her in the dark. The king's young hand pressed to the sealed pact. The border province fed to the rising shadow. The calculation laid bare across the air. The half-belief the king had so carefully built begins to crack like cooling glass. The murmur that runs through the watching survivors is not the murmur of a crowd choosing a side, but of a crowd watching the floor of its world fall away. And the cold overhead light seems to harden on the king's suddenly bloodless face. King Aldred's flowing speech dies in his throat. Cornered, exposed, he does the thing the powerful do when their story finally fails, and he reaches for the corruption himself. For the crown kept its own smoldering ember from the old pact. Hidden against this very day, sealed in a reliquary at his breast. Black vein light blooms across the king's golden chest as he tears the reliquary open and takes the ember into himself, choosing in front of the whole city to become the monster rather than be unmasked as one. And the irony of it lands like a struck bell across the square. The transformation is grotesque and swift. The king's regal frame swells and darkens with borrowed corruption into a towering thing that recalls the demon lord Kale killed a season ago. Cloth of gold splitting over a shape of shadow, and the watching city recoils as the truth becomes visible in the king's own changing body. For the realm sees now, with its own eyes, that the power the crown condemned in its hero is the very power the crown wears to keep its throne. The demon lord and the king revealed as two masks over one face. And the line between savior and villain and monster collapses entirely in the daylight above the palace steps. The two collide on the palace steps in a storm of black fire and ember light, the false savior and the made villain. The king's stolen corruption greedy and wild and vast, Kale's mastered and quiet and cold. And the watching city finally sees the truth the mirrors only suggested. The real monster never came from the deep at all. It wore cloth of gold and smiled at a feast, and it lifted a cup in a toast about debts that can never be repaid. And now it towers in shadow over the steps of its own palace, and Kale, climbing into the storm of black fire, feels no triumph at being proven right, only the cold work that remains. Kale fights not with rage, but with the clarity the jail taught him, reading the king's wild corruption the way he once read the schedule of the dripping dark, finding the seams in its greed, turning its own hunger against it. And step by step, he drives the swollen golden thing back up the steps it once descended in triumph. Black fire breaks against him and is turned. The corruption that the king cannot control lashes out wildly at his own remaining guards, and Kale sweeps his mastered heat across the steps to shield the cowering survivors, so that the city watches the Cinder King it was taught to fear standing between it and the monster the crown became. The swollen golden thing that was the king swings a vast clawed limb at a knot of fleeing courtiers, and Kale is there before it lands, the curved black blade catching the blow in a shower of ash sparks. And the watching city sees with its own eyes the villain protecting the very nobles who toasted his poisoning. Above them, the great mirrors of the throne hall crack and chime under the storm of black fire, each fracture throwing the battle into 100 shards, so that to the survivors in the square, it seems 100 Kales fight 100 kings. The truth of the realm shattering and multiplying in the broken glass. Lyse fights at Kale's side without ever deciding to, her pale blue focus crystal threading bright light through the black fire, binding the king's wild lashings, opening the seams for Kale's blade. And for a heartbeat, the battlefield looks like the old days on the rift, the swordsman and the mage against the dark, except the dark wears a crown now, and the savior is called a villain, and the mage fights against the kingdom she served, and the three of them know it even as they fight. The bitter inversion of everything the histories will have to be rewritten to hold, and still they fight, because the monster on the steps must fall. At the top of the steps, in the mirrored throne hall where the poisoned cup was lifted, the battle spills across the checkerboard floor, the tall mirrors throwing the black fire and the ember light back 1,000-fold, so that the hall seems full of warring gods. And Kale drives the king's swollen shadow back against the very throne. For a moment, the king's borrowed power seems to gain the upper hand, the black fire surging, driving Kale back across the checkerboard floor toward the very throne. And the watching survivors gasp as their discarded hero is forced to one knee beneath the swollen golden shadow. But Kale has knelt before in this hall, poisoned and betrayed on these same tiles, and he rises now as he could not rise then. The cinder cracks across his chest blazing bright, the curved black blade carving an arc of cold fire that drives the king's shadow staggering back against the dais. He brings the the curved black blade down and unmakes the king's stolen corruption, not in a killing stroke, but in a severing one, cutting the borrowed ember from the man who could not master it, and the golden monster collapses inward, the shadow boiling off into ash, until only a trembling, ordinary man remains. King Aldred sprawls on the checkerboard floor where Kale once knelt dying, stripped of his stolen power, his cloth of gold scorched and his face slack with terror, and the whole watching realm. The survivors crowding the great doors, the disarmed knights, Lys with her crystals still bright, waits for the villain to do the villain's thing. Kale stands over the unmasked king with a smoking black blade at his throat, the ember in his eye reflected in the mirrors 100 times, and the moment hangs, and every instinct of rage and every whisper of the corruption tells him to finish it, to take the throne, to write the crown's final lie in the king's blood. Instead, Kale lowers the blade. To kill the king now would be to become exactly the monster the king's speech named, to prove the crown right, to let the realm bury the truth under a tidy story of a corrupted hero who murdered his sovereign. And the throne of cinders refuses the pin the king is dying to hand him. He steps back from the trembling king and turns to the shattered mirrors that still play the crown's crimes for the watching city. And he lets them play, because the harshest sentence he can pass on Aldred is not death, but to live unmasked, powerless, his golden legend inverted before the eyes of the people who once believed it. He leaves the broken king alive amid the glass, and that mercy lands on the watching realm stranger and heavier than any execution. For a conqueror who kills is a tyrant the mind can name, and a conqueror who spares the man who poisoned him is a thing the old words cannot hold. And the square below falls utterly silent. Kale turns his back on the throne he could so easily have taken, the throne of fused gold, the seat of the realm, his by right of conquest, and by right of the truth now blazing in the mirrors. And he walks away from it, ash drifting from his shoulders in the cold hall light, wanting none of it. In the great square below, the survivors who cheered him and then forgot him now look up at the Cinder King framed in the mirrored doors with something far more complicated than fear. And Kale, half lit by his own ember glow, gives them no speech, no claim, no crown, only the truth standing plainly behind him in the broken glass. Lys stands beside him in the doorway, amber eyes clear at last, the focus stones dimming in her hands, and she asks him without words whether the man who climbed out of the drowned jail can ever climb back from the corruption that saved him, whether there is a road home from what the kingdom made him. Kale's silence in answer is the same silence he once left in her chest in the jail, heavier than any vow, and Lys understands that he does not know, that no one knows, that the question is the truest thing between them now, and she chooses, standing in the doorway, to stay and help him find the answer. But the story does not end clean, because as the city kneels and the broken king weeps among the glass, and Lys mirrors burn their truth into a generation's memory, far beneath the palace in a sealed crypt no scrying glass has ever touched, a single black ember the old pact left behind opens slowly like an eye in the dark. For the corruption the king woke a generation ago was never only one thing. It was a seed, and seeds are patient. And the power Kale mastered to save himself is the same power now, stirring in the deep places of every kingdom that ever bargained with the dark, waking to the sound of a savior who calls himself a villain. Kale feels it the moment it wakes, a cold pull behind the ember in his eye, a whisper that knows his name and the shape of the throne he has just refused, and standing in the doorway of the palace he saved twice and was betrayed by once. The throne of cinders understands that the war he ended was only ever the first of them. He descends the steps into the kneeling city with Lys at his side and the broken realm at his back. No longer hero, no longer the crown's villain, but something the old words cannot hold. And behind him the throne sits empty, and the mirrors burn, and far below the ember opens wider, patient and waiting. Word of Aurelian's fall, and the king's unmasking races down every mountain road faster than the crown's old victory news ever did. And in distant courts other kings who kept their own smoldering embers from the old pact read the reports by candlelight and feel, for the first time, the cold pull of the thing they thought they owned. In the ember waste, the abandoned villages light bonfires not for a hero, but for a reckoning. And the people with black vein light at their throats look toward the white city on the mountain and wonder whether the man who fed them when the crown starved them will free the realm or remake it in cinder. The old farmer who first asked the hooded stranger his name stands at one of those bonfires, telling the gathered children the story of the ember-eyed man who emptied a garrison without lifting a blade. And the children listen wide-eyed, and a new legend begins to take a shape that no crown will ever be able to seal away. The young war widow who took the first spark walks among the rebuilt villages emerges now as something between a captain and a healer, carrying the Cinder King's strict laws to the freed towns. And the frontier the crown abandoned begins, slowly and clumsily, to govern itself in the shadow of a man who refused to rule it. Lys walks the shattered mirror vault alone in the days after, cataloging the crimes the broken glass still plays, binding them into records that cannot be sealed again. And she understands that the truth she unleashed cannot be put back, that every kingdom built on a buried savior or a bargain with dark is now a crack waiting to spread. She understands too that she helped strike the first blow, and the weight of it settles on her differently than the old guilt of the jail, not as shame now, but as duty. The duty of the only person besides Kale who knows the full shape of what is waking beneath the realm, and she squares her shoulders to it. Kale takes neither the throne nor the crown's offered surrender. He sets the unmasked king to the work of rebuilding the frontier he abandoned, washed by the very people he wronged, a sentence of service rather than death, and the realm gropes toward a strange new shape with no name. For the cinder-marked man who refuses to rule it yet refuses to leave, the great houses send envoys to the empty throne hall, expecting a conqueror to bargain with, and they find instead Lys and her unsealable records, and the Cinder King who tells them through her, in the flat, certain voice, that he wants no crown and no oath, only that the truth in the mirrors never again be buried. The envoys ride home unsettled, unable to fit the Cinder King into any of the old shapes. Not a usurper, not a regent, not a king. And the realm beneath them begins to govern itself in his shadow, clumsy and free and afraid, watched over by a man who will not sit on the seat he won. But the ember beneath the palace does not wait for the realm to find its footing. In the dead of the third night, it sends its first tendril upward through the crypt stone, seeking the warmth of the corruption Kale carries. And the palace cellars fill with a heat that has nothing to do with fire and everything to do with hunger. A servant girl carrying lamp oil down to the cellars is the first to feel it, the air thickening, the shadows leaning wrong against the lantern light, her own reflection in the black water of a cistern smiling a half-beat after she does. And she drops the oil and flees up the stairs with a scream that wakes the half-rebuilt palace. Kale is awake before her scream finishes. He has not truly slept since the jail, and the cold pull behind his ember eye has sharpened all night into a summons he cannot ignore. So he rises and descends into the cellars alone against Lys's sharp warning, the black vein light at his throat brightening with every step. The cellars unfold beneath him into older and darker stone, the rebuilt palace giving way to foundations laid before the kingdom had a name. And the heat grows with each level, not the heat of fire, but the close, hungry warmth of something vast, turning its attention toward the one warm thing in the dark. He passes the flooded mouth of the drowned jail on his descent, the green torchlight still guttering over the black water where he once hung in chains, and he does not stop. But the ember at his heart flares at the memory, and the whisper in his blood swells louder, reminding him in his own voice of everything that was done to him here. In the lowest crypt, behind a seal older than the kingdom, he finds the ember the old pact left. No monster yet, only a single floating coal of perfect arc hanging in the still, dead air of the buried chamber, pulsing slow against the black stone. It turns toward him as he enters like a flower toward the sun, the cinder cracks at his throat answering its pulse. And Kale understands that it recognizes in the throne of cinders not an enemy at all, but the heir it has waited a long generation in the dark to claim. It does not attack. It offers, the way it offered him once on the Violet Rift and once in the Green Jail. And this time the offer is the whole continent. Every buried ember waking at his word, every betraying crown unmade. A kingdom of cinder with Kale upon its throne, and no king left alive to poison a hero again. And the temptation is the cruelest thing he has ever faced, because part of him wants it. The realm did betray him, did bury him in the deep, did try to make him the villain to hide its own monstrousness behind a hero's burning name. The cold, clear voice in the coal points out, reasonably, in the still crypt dark, that only one who rules the whole of it could ever guarantee that no feast ever again ends in a poisoned cup. And the reason is sound, and that is what makes it terrible. Kale stands in the crypt dark with that answer trembling on a knife, the ember at his heart leaning toward the ember in the air, the two corruptions reaching for each other across the still cold of the crypt. And for the length of a long breath, the throne of cinders is closer to becoming the world's doom than he has ever been. Lys finds him there, having followed against his warning down the older and older stone, the pale blue light of her crystal trembling on the buried walls, and she does not raise it as a weapon. She simply steps between Kale and the floating coal, putting her own unprotected back to the thing that could unmake her, and reminds him in the plain accusing voice that toppled a king, of exactly who he refused to become on the palace steps above. She reminds him that the mercy he showed the man who poisoned him was the one thing the corruption could not predict, the single move that broke the king's story instead of confirming it, and that it must not be undone here in the dark. The coal offers him a throne, she says, for the same reason the king's counselors once needed a shining hero. Because a man on a cinder throne is a thing that can be aimed, and Kale has never once in his life let himself be aimed by anyone. Kale closes his ember eye and refuses the coal a third time. The hardest refusal of his life, harder than the violet rift, harder than the starving jail. And the rejected ember flares in something like fury before guttering down, and the crypt goes cold and quiet, and the immediate threat folds back into the dark from which it woke. But refusal is not destruction, and Kale knows it as he climbs back up the older stone into the gray dawn with Lys silent at his side. The embers are waking across the realm, whether he claims them or not, and the corruption he mastered is the only key that fits them. Locks now opening in every kingdom that ever bargained with the deep. They emerge into the half-rebuilt palace as the morning bells begin, and Lys studies Kale's face in the new light, searching it the way she once searched the scrying mirrors, and she sees that the third refusal has cost him something that will not return, a weariness settling into the gray eye to match the burning red of the other. Kale tells her, in the flat voice that no longer makes the fire lean away because there is no fire here, only mourning, that the coal will not be the last to wake, and that he can already feel the others stirring far off like distant drums, and that he must go to them before they find heirs less able to refuse than he was. So the throne of cinders makes a harder choice than ruling or refusing. He chooses to hunt, to walk the continent, dousing the waking embers one buried crypt at a time before they find heirs less merciful than he. And the realm watches its uncrowned villain prepare to leave the White City not in conquest, but in grim, lonely purpose. Before he goes, he stands one last time in the empty throne hall among the shattered mirrors, looking at the fused throne he refused and the spot on the checkerboard floor where the ashen hero died and the throne of cinders was born. And he feels neither hatred for the place nor longing, only the cold clarity of a chapter closing. The broken king, set to his sentence of service, watches the Cinder King prepare to leave from the foot of the dais, and whatever he expected, a final cruelty. A gloating word does not come, and that absence is the heaviest thing the unmasked king will carry into the long work of rebuilding what he ruined. He sheds the last of the crown's old story at the city gate, burning the final scrap of his white hero's cloak in a roadside brazier so that no legend can be made of him going or coming. And the gray smoke rises over Aurelian as the man who saved the world twice walks out of it for the last time. Lys rides at his side, having chosen at last the seam between crown and cinder as her own ground, the keeper of the truth that must not be buried again, the one mind besides his that knows the full shape of the waking dark. And the two of them descend the mountain road into a realm cracking quietly along 100 hidden faults. Behind them, Aurelian shrinks into white and gold distance, its bells ringing uncertainly now for a man who refused its throne, unsure whether they toll for a hero or a villain or something the city has no word for. And Kale does not look back at the place that cheered him, buried him, feared him, and finally could not name him. On a wind-scoured ridge at dusk, in profile against a bleeding orange sky, just as he once stood at the start of his long fall, the throne of cinders pauses and feels every buried ember in the realm turn toward him at once, a continent of whispers offering the same crown, and he sets his jaw and walks on. The first waking crypt lies 3 days east, beneath a fortress city whose king still smiles at feasts and toasts heroes with cups they should not drink. And as Kale and Lys crest the final hill the bells of that distant city ring in welcome for a hero of its own, unaware that the man on the ridge has learned exactly how that story ends. And so the legend the crown tried to bury walks free across a breaking world. No longer the ashen hero, no longer merely the crown's villain, but the one thing every betraying throne now fears more than the demon lord it once woke from the deep. Somewhere far ahead, in a sealed crypt beneath a smiling king who toasts his own borrowed heroes, a single black ember opens slowly like a waking eye in the dark, and turns its patient hunger toward the east, and waits for the man with cinder in his veins to come. The road east is long, and the realm is full of buried fires. And on that last ridge before the smiling city, Kale Verne lets a single ember flake of ash drift past his half-lit face, the gray eye and the burning eye both fixed on the white towers ahead. The question the whole continent is only beginning to ask hanging unanswered in the dust. When the savior who became a villain finally runs out of embers to douse, when the last waking dark is hunted down and put back to sleep, when the realm at last has no more monsters left to fear in its deep places, one question will remain. What name will be left to call the man still walking the lonely, ridgelines with cinder in his veins and ash drifting past his mismatched eyes? And in all the breaking world, will anyone be brave enough to speak that name to his face?